पीछे से मैडम जी टिकट हो गया टिकट मैडम टिकट टिकट भाई
We're delighted to welcome you to the 14th Jaipur Literature Festival protected by Dettol from the Diggi Palace. Our session today is supported by the JCB Prize for Literature. The Editor's Table:
Himanjali Sankar,
Poulomi Chatterjee, Mansi Subramaniam, Rahul Soni and Pujita Krishnan in conversation with Ramu Ramanathan. From recognizing raw potential in a manuscript to working with the authors to retain and refine their unique voice, editors accompany a book through its entire journey. While very different, all the shortlisted books share a strong sense of narrative, well-defined characters, evocative settings, as well as playful sense of experimentation. Ramu Ramanathan is in conversation with the editors of the 5 books shortlisted for the JCB Prize for Literature 2020.
Himanjali Sankar,
Kar has written some children's and young adult books, including The Stupendous Time-Telling Dog and Talking of Muskan. Mrs. C remembers her novel for adults won the FICCI Publishing Award for Upcoming Author of the Year in 2018. Himanjali is editorial director at Simon & Schuster India. Poulomi Chatterjee has worked at Macmillan India Limited, Penguin Books India, where in addition to her editorial responsibilities, she managed the Rights and Contracts Department, and Hachette India, where she is presently editor-in-chief and publisher of the Adult and Business Books Division. Mansi Subramaniam is executive editor and head of literary rights at Penguin Random House India. Rahul Soni is a writer, editor and translator. He has edited the anthology of Hindi poetry in English titled Home from a Distance and translated Shrikant Verma's book of poems Magad, Gitanjali Shree's novel The Roof Beneath Their Feet, a selection of Ashok Vajpayee's poems titled A Name for Every Leaf, and Pankaj Kapoor's novella Dopehri. He is currently executive editor literary with HarperCollins India. Pujita Krishnan is executive editor at Aleph Book Company. She commissions and edits non-fiction and literary fiction. Prior to that, she was an editor-writer for websites and magazines. Ramu Ramanathan is a playwright and director. He has scripted plays such as Cotton 56, Polyester 84, Comrade Kumbhkaran and Mahadev Bhai. He is also the author of the poetry collection My Encounters with a Peacock and To Sit on a Stone and Other Shorts, and co-editor of Babri Masjid 25 years on. He is the editor of Print Week and What Packaging magazines. Please do remember to comment by typing it into the comment section. Ladies and gentlemen, we now present the editor's table.
Himanjali Sankar,
Poulomi Chatterjee, Mansi Subramaniam, Rahul Soni and Pujita Krishnan in conversation with Ramu Ramanathan. Enjoy the session.
So thank you. First and foremost, congratulations to all 5 of you, and a personal thanks because I tremendously enjoyed reading whatever you all have created, and it also kept me going during the pandemic months. So heartfelt gratitude for that, and it was, I think, the most wonderful way to spend the pandemic days. Rahul, I'll start off this session with you. First and foremost, kudos, congratulations for Mishe. The question is, it was a book, I think it was probably the first book that I read as part of the JCB Awards. And right from sort of moment one, it was, absolutely enthralling. It begins with that map of Kutanad and all those hundreds of stories that sort of burst forth. And a very unusual style of storytelling. I mean, there's mythology, there's allegories, and there are stories within stories. And the concern was also because one is from that part of Kerala, that the reader has to piece this little jigsaw puzzle, piece by piece, and then, unravel the mysteries that are sort of coming forth. My question to you is your first thoughts as a sort of, when you encountered this book, and was it in any way daunting, or did you just feel, I mean, how did you respond to the text when you confronted it in English, and how did you hear of it? Is my question.
Thanks, Ramo. So I think my first reaction, and this persisted as I read Mustache in English, was that of just continuously marveling at the fact that Harish was able to keep it all together at every step, pretty much. I think in an earlier conversation, you'd said flawed masterpiece.
That's true.
I think looking at it in that way is kind of interesting, because I don't think I don't think it's possible for a novel of this scope and ambition and size to not be flawed. It comes with the territory, it comes with the structure. Formal perfection is possibly something that we can expect from a novella, and not of something this sprawling. It's definitely a masterpiece, though. I think there's no question of that. And the kinds of things that he's doing, and you mentioned some of them: history, mythology, folklore. What he's trying to do here, I think, is just incarnate this place, this territory, landscape, waterscape of Kutanad, with all its flora and fauna and human beings. And of course, it will be unruly, and as Aruni said, it will misbehave.
Correct.
It does not follow your linear trajectories, whether it's a plot or time. I think one of the most interesting things and least commented is what he does with time.
True.
How it collapses and dilates, how it folds into itself pretty much through the book. And of course, there is the much commented theme of how he interrogates both caste politics and gender politics. In fact, I don't know. I think there has been some misreadings on the latter front. It has been read by a few people, I think, as maybe one of an example of exactly the kind of masculinity that it chooses to interrogate, and I think that is a misreading. And Jayashree, in her introduction to the novel, also points to this fact. And of course, there is the caste politics angle, which is the thing that maybe I found the most kind of daunting. And I'm glad that Harish chose to do an introduction that kind of lays out the terrain for you, at least, so that you're sort of familiar with what you're going to encounter.
Sure. So, quick follow-up question. Maybe 50 years, 100 years from now, will we see a statue of Vavachan in South Kerala?
Well, I have, yes, no idea how to answer that.
Yeah. Pujita, this is about a prelude to a riot, and I mean, so 2-3 things. One is, I'm a theatre person. That's what I do for a living. And when I sort of read the book, the first thing that struck me was this would be a fabulous play. With Nasiruddin Shah as the patriarch, and we probably, if we have the budget, we get Yo-Yo Ma to render the music for it, and we get William Kenbridge to direct it, etc. And what was truly fascinating while reading the text, of course, it deals with many things, and the literary pundits have sort of spoken about it, but the most fascinating thing for me was the important events which are transpiring in the 21st century. Most of them are happening off stage. And as a reader, you have to be attentive to that. You have to take cognizance of that fact. My question to you is that when you are dealing with such a whether it's a slim book or a novella, and it's so delicate, everything is so tender and fragile. Where do you negotiate with, say, someone like Annie? her own sensibility, her politics, and of course her literary panache. So at what level do you sort of come in is the question, without obviously besmirching whatever she's trying to do.
So I think your question is how comfortable as an editor would you be to leave certain things off the page rather than
Yeah.
delve into it. And I think in this case, there was no question of adding that sort of a more historical background to it, simply because the way it is written and where it is set is so amorphous. It could be anywhere. And because of it, to me, when I read it, I saw it in the 90s. But somebody else might, when they read it at a later point in time, they might see it in their own kind of reality. So I don't think there was any kind of, we didn't feel a need for her to add more realistic details or to get the history of the country itself into the picture, because it didn't seem to need it, and it didn't really seem to matter exactly how this kind of situation came about, or how these thoughts came about. So in this case, there was no negotiation that we really felt the need for. And the fact that some of it happened off stage, I think allows us to fill in our own details and make it part of our own kind of knowledge and reality. So that's where the discussion kind of stopped and ended.
And the book is being translated into multiple languages now, right?
Hopefully, yes.
Yes. So how does that work? I mean, in the sense that are you in a way localizing certain things? I mean, what is the level of again intervention that we are seeing, especially with a text such as this?
As editors of the English book, we in fact have almost nothing to do with the translation itself, because it is the translator and the publisher in the language who will decide what amount of localization it needs and if it needs any other intervention. So, I mean, as somebody who doesn't know any other language with any sort of flair, we don't interfere in that aspect of it.
Yeah, Himanjali, this is about Chosen Spirits. Again, we were while reading the book and having conversations amongst ourselves, trying to figure out the genre. So, and one of the things that we sort of stumbled across was this whole business of literary prognostication in a way. So, which is something that I think Shomit is, attempting to do. And it is interesting because, again, what he says in the, preface or acknowledgement in the book about where it's located, Delhi, of course, and the best case scenario, as he calls it. But ultimately, any literary prognostication, as they say, whether it's Orwell or Huxley or everything, is essentially about its own, times and about the own era in which. Are there bits when you were, of course, negotiating this material, and it is ambitious and it's also very brave, bits that are prescient in a way, which triggered you, and if while you were reading it, the allusions to these two worlds colliding, and you felt that okay, here I probably might need to make sure that the boundaries are not blurred or what have you. Was there, again, as a co-creator to this book, what was the role that you had to play, especially?
Yeah. So to address what you said at first about any any work does belong to the era in which it is written, I completely agree with that. And it's like, I mean, like I would agree with the statement, like there is no art for art's sake, really. I mean, the personal is political, those kind of things. So it's difficult to keep a writer's own personal views, even personality, out of a work of creation. So, and this works in different ways, in varying degrees with different genres, authors. And of course, we can, genre, of course, is another discussion. And but when we're looking at this book, I think I would like to just see it as one really smart novel, which Samit has written. It's very intelligent writing. It's set in a world which is really a few years away from where we are. And especially with with the current hindsight of the pandemic, that world seems particularly prescient. I mean, even when I read it first in 2019, it was something that was very near. And particularly in the way the world has been moving in the last 1 year, like digitally or in terms of just becoming more totalitarian surveillance. So it's literally like the world is playing catch up with the future, which is shown in Chosen Spirits. And many reviews have also talked about how it's not very far from this book. What it shows, the world it depicts, is not very far from our present reality at all.
Sure.
So yeah, so you were asking about the particular bits.
That's right.
And yeah, so that, I mean, I would say there's the polarization that is shown in this world, the two separate Delhis that you said, and how there is really no overlap between, there is one side you have the very overcrowded, unhygienic sort of a Delhi which is simmering beneath the surface. There are protests, there's water shortage and all of that. And at another level, there is this very sanitized middle to upper class kind of lives where people are going about their usual business of living, putting their heads down, not interacting with the other world. And of course, I mean, it is something that is, I mean, that is a part of any reality that we have. But I just also feel that with the pandemic, perhaps that this polarization has been hastened. It's sort of more, it's going more and more towards that world. Like if you think of that in India, we're talking about the lockdown being announced in 4 hours. And so immediately these two worlds get really segregated. I felt at that time it got really segregated in terms of we are living in our little bubbles of isolation. Especially towards the beginning, we were breathing purer air. And so we were sort of able to, I mean, whatever the other stresses might have been, but we were able to survive in a very different way from those who had to take to the streets, who had to fight isolation, not isolation, sorry, I mean starvation, job loss. And so this polarization, which he captures very well, we are actually just hurtling more and more towards it.
Sure.
And at a sort of less serious level, I would say even technologically or digitally, the kind of things he's described in this book, those can become realities very, very soon. Like there is this, you remember there was a tattoo on the wrist, which really reminds me of Alexa, the Fitbit. It's a sort of combination of those things. It's just sort of, those are more, I mean, or even like, say these elaborate video calls, which were described. I remember when I read it first, it was not part of our reality at all, but look at us now, we are sitting in the Zoom call. So yeah, we're almost there. And yeah, so I think I should stop before this is suddenly getting too meta.
Yeah, but it's also a fairly mischievous book in the sense that it mocks, but it mocks gently. I mean, there's that bit about the shopping mall, and of course the reference to JNU, and then of course what's very nice and probably could be explored a lot more is what he does with the senior citizens, and especially in this 2020 we begin to realize the significance of a lot of that. My question is again, when obviously he submits this manuscript, and it's marvelous because he's having a lot of fun. You can see that, but there are obvious tropes which are there, and especially this particular genre is littered with many of those. So again, what is excess? What can be explored? Especially with tropes, with anecdotes. How do you sort of how do you tackle that?
Yeah. Actually, I think that is what I found really exciting about this manuscript when it was first submitted to us, that the many levels at which it's working, because it's also got this, like, it's really a fun, at many levels, it's a really fun novel. It's got inventive with the language, the way it's creating new terminology. And like you're saying, and at some levels, it's addressing some really serious themes, but it's been done in a way that there's a remove from that seriousness, and which is what I think kind of makes this like a mainstream novel, really. I think it can appeal to any reader, from a young person to an older person, because it's just got that language, the quality of it is such.
Sure. Are a lot of young people picking it up? I'm just curious to know.
I'm not very sure, but it's not a good example to give one's own kids, but my daughter, who's a teenager, I tried it on her first, and it sort of worked with her. But yeah.
Okay. Did it?
It did, but it was because it's the way I think the language and the kind of like the whole inventiveness of it is very much a part of their realities.
Sure, and the concerns,
yeah.
Sure. Mansi, I have really so first and foremost, congratulations. I mean, I see that there's a lot of books that you've collaborated on, and that's absolutely fabulous. I'm going to be sort of dwelling on two of the books that you worked on. One is Burning and the other is Gin Petrol. And so there was an interview which again one came across. This is Vladimir Putin, the Russian president, and it's there on YouTube, and it's a fascinating piece of theater. So there is the Financial Times editor. He is interviewing Mr. Putin, and Putin, being Putin, keeps him waiting. And I think the interview is supposed to be in the noon, and he lands up at midnight. And it's again under very intimidating circumstances because it's the Kremlin staff all around. And then, of course, this man walks in, and by then, I think the FT director has not even been fed, and things like that. So it's an hour-long interview in which he pontificates about many things: anthropology, history, political science, etc. And he comes across as sort of the wise statesman. Coming to the two books specifically, there are two things which he says during that interview. So one is, and I'm going to quote him, because he says the liberal idea has outlived its purpose, and in response to a particular question, and that this whole notion that we have of Western democracy, that is a spent force. And of course, he builds up a kind of a premise for it, and he argues, that it's a 100-year-old tradition, and how it really hasn't served its purpose. And that is, and when sort of asked a counter question, he says the liberal idea has become obsolete because it comes in conflict with the interests of the overwhelming majority of the population. Anyway, the reason to mention all this is that it so happened that I was listening to this longish interview, and of course the concerns that were raised during that, and simultaneously these two books came into my hand, that is Burning and Gin Petrol. And somewhere for me, in addition to, of course, what the books are attempting to do, it also seemed like a kind of an antidote to this sort of majoritarian populism, in a sense, or this sort of absolute leader or supreme leader, as you call it. Again, sorry, the question to you is, obviously you're negotiating with a book like this, and then of course there are elements of it which are part of a very solid political gesture. So when you're working on a text like this, how do you find that balance between sort of good aesthetics, very agitprop? It could very easily turn into something totally agitprop, or like our days in good old days in college and so on, university, where we did street theater. It could very easily turn into one of that. So how do you find this balance, and at the same time, how does it become an antidote to the kind of ideology that, say, someone like Mr. Putin is advocating? Yeah, sorry.
So actually, I think we could all have an extraordinary and endless debate about what Mr. Putin thinks the liberal idea or the liberal order really is.
Correct.
I won't really get into that. I mean, are these political books, or are they books that are responding to political moments? Well, then yes. Gin Petrol on the Purple Line is like, it's built upon years of on-ground reportage, and you can see that in Deepa's sort of journalistic eye for detail within the novel. So like the reality of the fact that children go missing every single day in this country, it cannot be ignored. Like the actual number varies from report to report, but in every single case, the number is the shocking one. But this is the reality that often is ignored, because these are numbers, and then they get turned into statistics. And so Deepa does this extraordinary thing of putting that reality into perspective. And when we're talking about a burning, that also is a novel that's very much set in our world, a world in which like very violent acts of terrorism do occur. And the fact that often belonging to minorities are found in order to sort of be made an example of. I think both of these novels are corollaries to the India shining narrative more than anything else. I mean, they're strongly political novels, but they're also like turning against the idea of like the aspirational young Indian narrative, like this great country where your dreams can come true. That is the narrative I think that they're strongly sort of turning against. I also do want to add that, like, to me as an editor, they're great novels, and then they're political ones. Like, I think they're intelligent, well-paced novels. Like, they focus on character, they focus on plot, they're entertaining, they're interesting, and I tend to gravitate as an editor towards great stories that are well told, and I tend to believe that the purpose of reading is pleasure first and foremost. So, I mean, I would say yes, these are both political novels, and they are both responses to our moment in politics. But I would also add that they're also just terrific novels, just like every single other novel that's been longlisted for the JCB. I mean, they're all terrific.
Yeah. Just two quick questions. One is if you can just share, because I mean the covers are both the covers, and they are like works of art in a way. So if you can, and generally these are things that never get discussed. I mean, we should probably do a session only on book covers, I feel sometimes. Yeah. So if you can just quickly share a little bit about the two book covers. I
I'm
mean,
so glad you asked that. So our art director Gunjan Alavat worked on both of them, and they're both just absolutely exquisite. They came up after multiple rounds of discussion in both cases with the authors involved. So actually, both of these books were published in the US and the UK, and very often, we tend to share covers when there are international publishers in place. But actually, for both of these, we wanted to do our own covers. So Gin Patrol on the Purple Line, like one of the things that Deepa and I spoke about, and then we shared with our art director Gunjan, was that we wanted it to be not a flamboyant kind of cover, like that sort of desi truck art kind of cover, which is often what one sees in certain novels. And we wanted it to have a very quiet, elegant kind of feel. So what we ended up doing is really interesting because our art director made cutouts. Like he created images of like little children. He cut them out, placed them together, and then it was a very collaborative mixed media process. So these are that's the cover exactly. So these cutouts have been placed together in such a way that I think the disappearance of the children also comes into being. Like one of the things I really wanted to do at some point is, because I have the original cutouts that he made, I wanted to start using them as bookmarks for the cover as well. Like that was how those cutouts came to be. With a burning, I was very particular that train, which is so central to the first scene in the book, get captured. But the other thing was the book kind of hurtles at you, like the pace with which she writes, the pace with which she kind of journey into the book is like it's a hurtling pace. So that was what I wanted to capture. So the speed with which that train is going and how like the lines of the tracks are blurring, those are all things that we really thought captured the elemental pace of the book.
Sure. Thank you. So these covers are also used internationally, is what you're saying, is it? I mean,
No, we have different covers. So
okay.
and fabulous covers.
Okay.
Gin Patrol has a different cover in the US and a different cover in the UK, so it actually has 3 covers. And now, of course, it's in Germany and other countries as well.
Sure.
A Burning also has different covers in the US and the UK,
Okay,
and
got
all
it.
fabulous covers.
Yeah, lovely. Great. Paulami, before I come, I just have a general question. I mean, since we were discussing covers and it's more to do with the technical aspect of publishing, it's just something I'm curious about. There used to be a time when in the flannel panel of the page, when you open, you had the typesetter mentioned, the fonts described, etc. Have we sort of dispensed with that entire system altogether, where you had a little bit of history about the book, that who are the co-creators, other than the of course the author and so on? Because I find that in a lot of instances that seems to be missing, and it's nice. It's a little information you get about how this book actually came into being and why we are holding it. So is that again a conscious decision among publishers to sort of not mention fonts, not mention typesetting, etc.?
I think we mention the typesetter and the fonts and
Okay.
the setting, etc. It often happens with the designers that if they're in-house designers, they don't, you don't carry the name, just like the
Right.
editors don't have the names except for acknowledgements if the author wishes to.
Sure.
But if there is an illustrator or if there is a particular designer, then I think most of us, I think all of us carry
Sure.
that
Yeah.
for sure
Yeah.
on the cover. I'm not sure about the fonts and the typesetting. That would differ from. It's a house style thing actually.
Probably.
It's an internal decision.
Yeah. It just is a sort of joy for people who believe in ink on paper, right? So that.
Yes.
Coming to Dharani's book again, interesting in the sort of panorama that it explores the 3 generations of women, and in a way sort of minor characters in this sort of huge major cosmos. Men's irresponsibility, men's diversions, men failing their women. And again, the question is really sort of how she has forefronted certain things. And you're always sort of, when you're reading it, of course, you're always, I mean, it's inevitable, you're always comparing it with other kind of writers. So in my case, it happened that I was looking at, it was reminiscent of the kind of writing, say, at one point of time, Kurotulin Haider used to do, especially in her short stories and so on. Anyway, the thing is that very similar to Annie's book, there's a lot of little details and a lot of nuts and bolts and permutations and combinations with the multiple narratives, etc. So again, as a co-creator, as a literary editor, how is and your level of intervention? Because a couple of things: A, I shouldn't, as a reader, of course, get a sense of déjà vu. And the second thing is, of course, what she's trying to do and whether it is. For example, the two elderly matriarchs, they're absolutely fabulous, and I think we sort of jokingly said that we should probably invite them over for breakfast and, have a sort of spend the evening or whatever with them as well. So those kind of things, I mean, that exploration is, 10 out of 10 for that kind of thing. But this process of how do you sort of, push the author to essentially do a lot more with the material. So if you can share a little bit of that, yeah.
But Dharini, her craft is very honed. She's very it's a completely different experience working with someone like that, because we do work with debut writers.
Sure.
We do work with people who have good stories but need a lot more intervention from us to turn it into a book that will eventually be read and enjoyed. But with Dharini, she's a very keen observer of life. She's extremely well read. She's a poet herself. So structure is something that you don't really need to, intervene. Other than perhaps just saying, for me, for instance, the ending was very abrupt to begin with. And so she said she'll take a look at it, and she did change it. I still thought it was very abrupt, and I told her so. But when I look back, there is no other way that, you would not have that kind of open ending, which is you've taken the first step to, feeling, liberalized. You've taken a first step away from the generational preoccupations of how men deal with women, how we negotiate relationships. But it's just the first step. It could go anyway. She could fall back into exactly what her grandmom and mother did, and see men and relationships in exactly the same way. Or she could just move forward, and you don't know that.
Sure.
So in hindsight, I think it is a great ending. But it is something that I did point out to her twice or thrice. And other than that, there would be, I think, just nuances of words, nuances also of, character consistency, which is sometimes, it's like, would this person in this situation be reacting like this? Don't you think they would say this instead? Or wouldn't there just be an action here instead of words?
Sure.
So it was really at that level that the intervention with Dharini happened, and that's really kind of because of the writer she is.
Sure. And if I may ask a slightly rude question, how much of this is autobiographical? Because it felt, and I mean, it's fantastic. There's, somebody like Svetlana Alexievich, she collects stories, and I always think that there are more stories out there which we should be collecting. And of course, they need to be told as well. So how much was this autobiographical and very close to her?
I have no idea, because I
okay.
that question.
Yeah.
But like I said, she's an extremely keen observer of life.
Sure.
So even if it did not come from her own life, I think she would have picked up so much, from just being in a place or interacting with people, or being in a certain family.
Sure.
It's all of that she would have just picked up and registered, put away, and it's all come through in this novel.
Sure. Rahul, I'll come back to you. This is again about Moustache. And so I'm right now in Mumbai, and in Maharashtra right now there is a bit of a you can say, feathers are being ruffled about Balchandra Nemade's book Hindu, which was I think originally published in 2010 in Marathi. So anyway, there is a controversy by the Banjar community, and of course there's been notices which have been sent to Popular Prakashan, that's the publisher in Marathi, India Printing Works, the printer, and of course the author. But in addition to all this is the language which is being sort of deployed against Nemade, right? So he's a Jnanpith Award winner, as you know, very much accomplished, etc. And the manner in which he's being spoken about, etc. And the question is, of course, also what transpired prior to the English translation, of Mishe and what was happening in Kerala. So there are many euphemisms for controversy in this country. So two questions really, the fact that it was such a hot potato in a way, and it has become a concern. I mean, we all are extremely worried as individuals. Maybe the organizations we represent, sometimes they do take a different position, but as individuals. So, how difficult is it for you to stick your neck out as an individual, defending the need for such a book of vital importance, I feel, to be out there?
I think the primary thing before anything else was, of course, the quality of the work. I won't lie. I approached it with a lot of skepticism, as one does with books that come with all the hype and controversy attached, and that sort of baggage. And honestly, there were a few translators that we tried out. The first few, reading them, you couldn't get a sense of what the book was like, what it was trying to do, any of that. But we stuck to it, and I approached Jayashree to kind of give it a read and see if she would try to take this on. And she did come back with a detailed write-up about the book, a couple of chapters that she had translated. And it was at that point that it became clear to me that this is a book we absolutely had to do. Until then, we were relying on word of mouth from people who had read it in the original, saying, no, despite everything, this is definitely worth doing. There is literary merit to it. There is quality. And I mean, the controversial bits are a very, very tiny part of the book and it is seeking to do. This is a reflection of life in all its messiness. And if there are a few characters in here who think and act in despicable ways, well, that is what life is like. So, I mean, I think what this also gestures towards is just how important it is to find the right translator and carry all qualities of the original into the target language, English in this case. And Jayashree is such a rare translator. Yeah, we're just lucky to have her.
Absolutely. Okay. I think we have a problem in the sense that we have just about 5 minutes to the session. So all these other millions of questions that I have sort of sent you, we probably may have to say pass. What I'll probably do is, since I'm a innocent babe in the wood vis-a-vis the publishing industry, the way it works in the theatre fraternity is that whenever anybody writes a play, say someone like me writes a play, I basically go and read the play. We have what is called cold readings, and then the thumb rule is you basically read the play to your enemies. And if the enemies, that is your colleagues and competitors who are also writing plays, and if they walk out of the room without a smile on the face, it means, hey, you've written a good play, because they are very worried. And that's generally a good sort of thumb rule. And the second thing is, of course, you read to producers and actors, because ultimately they're going to stage it. And somehow over the last, and this has traditionally happened, whether it is Tendulkar Saab, Badal Babu, Karnad, etc., it is traditionally, a habit. And somehow it's sort of reinforced the kind of theatre that, we've all done in this country in its own sort of my question, and this is, I think we'll start off with Pujita, is that what is the process? I mean, I know that there is, manuscripts are called for, people submit, and it's fairly hefty kind of a process. But what is the process of rigor? I mean, there was a time when we had these beautiful literary magazines, we had literary greats. Someone like Premchand picks up a book by a short story by Agya, and even gives him the pen name. Things like that. You had book clubs, you had literary clubs, etc. So it was a lot of hustle, bustle, and jostle. In the absence of all that, what is the manner in which we can pick up a book like, say, a Mustache, for example, a hidden gem out there which just falls into your lap? So, yeah.
Is your question, how do we find these books? As
Right.
editors, as readers?
As editors and readers, mainly as editors. I mean, the hidden gems, not books, but the hidden gems.
The hidden gems. I think the only real way to do that is to talk to a wide variety of people, especially if you're looking for hidden gems in other languages and don't have enough ability to read in that language. And that is absolutely the only way that you find these hidden gems that others will have some kind of knowledge about. Mm-hmm. And then, like Rahul said, getting it translated into English is a whole different game altogether. Because to find somebody who understands the text and who is able to translate it without losing too much of it is a challenge in itself. So.
Himanjali, I think my question is also, are we sort of somewhere stuck with a kind of similar gene pool of people, and hence not able to go out of our literary islands? I mean,
that could, of course, that as editors we have our own individual tastes, and it could be limiting, and I suppose it's something we do struggle against. If you're, especially because we're talking about these particular books, say when Samit's book came, of course, I know that he has he comes with a certain reputation, with a certain career. But then when I'm looking at the manuscript, I will say that I'm just looking at this particular manuscript. And it's not about, I know that he has a certain reputation as a science fiction writer, which for me was in fact it's something that it's not a favorite genre of mine. So, and I wasn't sure of whether it's a genre that sells particularly in India. So I really did go by the strength of the manuscript. I read it with an open mind without trying to think of who this author is and how it can do in the future. I started reading it. I loved it. I immediately took to the book. And I think that's how the sort of journey started. So, there is sort of...
yeah. So, for instance, is there somebody like a Nabarun who's, Bhattacharya, who's writing today, and how do we find him if he is, someone as maverick as him and, writing those crazy series, the Fataru series. So that's what, yeah, sorry.
No, I think maybe somebody else can also pitch this up, but it is like when that manuscript comes in, and I think we are trying to publish different diverse themes, people, a lot of translation happening now. So we are sort of going there. We are headed there.
Sure. Mansi?
Yeah, so I completely agree with what both Pujita and Himanjali said. I also add that one thing that I think is important in the acquisition process is, we have this habit while acquiring a book where invariably somebody will say, okay, so what's the comp title? Like, what would you compare this to, to peg it against like the sales of a different title? I think I've been trying to unchain myself from that, because I think precedents can create that thing that you said, where we're still then within that same sort of bubble. So I've started now saying, actually, there is no comp title. That's why we have to do this. So I think that's often helpful.
Sure. Paulomi?
Well, I think, now a lot of our writers have moved away from older themes.
Sure.
You had the post-colonial novel there for a really long time. And I think for all of us, the joy is in whether we can ultimately publish it or not. At least getting work of quality that is very, very different. Look at all the shortlisted titles. Look at the long listed titles. You still have everything across I mean, it's some of them they fall between genres. There is experimentation. You may have the same themes, like, for instance, you could say that Dharani's novel is about 3 generations of women, and of course there have been novels about, with strong women characters central to them, and about 3 generations of women. But what she brings to it as the kind of writer she is will be very different from somebody else, writing it. So there's that, and I think the voices are quite varied now, like Sumit's work, for instance, and we do. In fact, I have a special interest in doing more SFF novels, and I'm trying to publish, more anthologies of SFF and science fiction and fantasy and newer voices, because there are really strong stories there. And it's not actually talking about a world which is so otherworldly that, one cannot connect to it. It's more and more really, like you said, it could be prescient, but it's also just in many ways reflective of the world we are living in, which is changing rapidly, very rapidly.
Sure.
So I think at the end of the day, yes, our tastes come into the picture for sure. And what we want to, bring forward, because fiction is much tougher to sell in this country than, unfortunately, much tougher to say. It is the soul of every list, I would say, but it is still really tough to sell. So it is, I think all of us have those fights with whoever we need to have them internally to do these books that really stand out for us. And I think that's it. It's the joy of just having, getting to read this variety at the end of the day.
Sure. Okay, I think that's a fairly nice note to end this on. We've sort of overshot a bit, but thank you very much, all 4. Rahul is not there, but yeah, thank you very much, all of you, for your time. I'll probably connect with each of you all independently and thank you, and probably take up some of these other questions that I have. These are my personal little doubts that I have. So thank you very much, and GLF, over to you.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all for that beautiful session. You've accompanied the writers through their writing journey. Such a privilege to listen to all of you behind the books that have been shortlisted for the JCB Prize for Literature 2020. We'd also like to thank the JCB Prize for Literature for supporting this session, and of course our celebration partners, Diageo. Thank you all for watching and being a supportive audience. Please do stay logged on to continue to watch with us in the Darbar Hall and the front lawn exciting sessions with a stellar list of speakers that we've specially curated for you. As you're aware, the cultural sector has been critically impacted by the pandemic, and while we have braced ourselves to embrace the new normal, we have struggled to ensure that we can continue to bring you a free flow of knowledge and ideas. We'd love your support towards Teamwork Arts. Any contribution would be welcome. Please tweet using hashtag Jaipur Literature Festival 2021 and tag us at Jaipur Lit Fest. The festival is protected by Dettol. We hope to see you in the next session.